Life is precious. I think we would all agree. But often we find that we take the very things that we do every day in life for granted until something happens in a blink of an eye. Hello, I'm Tom Russo, and this is In a Blink of an Eye, where we discuss stories from ordinary people whose lives are changed in an instant and how they overcome through faith, courage, family, and determination. Join me on this podcast for uplifting stories about how people face various challenges and learn to not only survive, but thrive. In a Blink of an Eye is sponsored by TradingCardsMarketplace.com. Discover, connect, collect. That's TradingCardsMarketplace.com. Now, I got to tell y'all, I am got a treat for all of you today. My guest today is Melvin Edwards. He is a renowned author, an award-winning author, and I don't want to steal his thunder, so without further ado, Melvin, thank you so much for being our guest today.
Thank you for having me as a guest. I'm honored to be here.
It is so exciting to me because you have such an incredible story to tell us, but I want to start at the beginning. I want to start about where you were born, where you were raised, kind of your interests, things like that. Tell us about your family. I know you recently got married 3 or 4 years ago, something like that.
It's actually 6 years ago. Time flies.
6 years. I see, time flies when you're having. And then, of course, we can certainly share our story about how last time we talked, I shared the story about how we met. This time, you're going to share it. So I'm throwing it to you, my man. Tell us about yourself, where you grew up, and everything.
Okay, I was born and raised in Houston. I lived in Houston until roughly 22, and then I got my first newspaper job and moved to Lake Jackson, Texas. So really, still the greater Houston area. I was the last of 4 kids. My 3 older siblings were so much older than I am that I grew up by myself. So I always said I was an only child with 3 siblings.
There
So
you go.
my parents and me. Great family life. My parents were strong Christians and strongly influenced my beliefs. But it was also always curious to me that they just couldn't agree on a denomination. So
Right.
they went to different churches, and that was always interesting trying to negotiate that. So I would go to Sunday school with my mom and go to church with my dad, and I chose it that way because my dad's church would always end at noon, and my mom's church would end whenever it felt like ending. So it was so I got to spend one-on-one time with my dad while we waited for my mom's church to end, and we'd go pick her up and then we'd go home.
And do you think that strengthened your faith because you got to see both sides of things, or do you think it hindered it a little bit and you had to kind of grow into it later in life? How did that affect you?
I don't know if it strengthened or hindered it, but it certainly gave me a perspective of how different denominations worshiped, and the goal was the same. So that's what it taught me. So over the years, my adult years, I've gone to different denominations, just because wherever we were living at the time.
And that's kind of what you did growing up. So that's kind of cool.
So
I mean,
that was comfortable. That was
Yeah.
comfortable. And
I like
I went to my grandmother lived in Madisonville, which is about 2 hours north of Houston. And so I
Know
would
it
spend
well.
lots of time there in the summer.
Got a great
Both of my
Christmas
parents
story.
grew up on farms in the Houston area, relatively Houston area. My mom was a little bit further outside of Houston. But both of my sides of my family have been in Texas since the Republic of Texas days. Unfortunately, my ancestors were enslaved, and we can talk about that a little bit more later. My books include that topic.
Right.
But I loved going to the country, visiting my grandmother in the summertime, and it was just very different from growing up in the city of Houston. Ride my bike everywhere and going fishing. Just great memories. My grandmother was the greatest.
The rural life is so different than the city life, and people who haven't had the good fortune of living in both don't understand that, because there's pros and cons of both. Getting to see both sides is a wonderful thing. And Cindy and I are just now beginning to experience it as we live south of College Station on some land that we bought. So we're kind of out in the middle of nowhere right now, and we've never done that. We've always been city people. So I can echo that sentiment for you, but
Yes.
not as a youth, but certainly now.
Yeah, that environment was definitely different from what I was used to growing up. But what was really different was when I went to college. You went to Texas Tech. I actually almost went there. My best friend and I were both going to go to Tech and room together, and he decided to go to Texas, and I didn't want to go to Texas because it was just too big for me.
Right.
So I ended up going to school in Arkansas.
Really?
Yeah. So not
I
the
didn't know that
university.
about going to Tech. You missed your mark there.
I missed my opportunity, but not the university. I didn't go to the University of Arkansas. I went to a much smaller school, private Christian school.
Okay.
Got a great journalism
What's
education
the name of
there. John Brown University.
it? Okay.
Yeah,
Fantastic.
got a great journalism education there. And the only thing I ever wanted to do was to be a writer. I decided when I was 12 years old, that's what I wanted to do with my life. I wanted to be a writer, and specifically a sports writer. And so my senior year in college, I called the Astros PR office, and Rob Madwick was the director at that time. We follow each other on Twitter, and he's actually been a guest on my podcast. And I said, I just bugged him, basically. I called him every couple of weeks. I said, I'm graduating this semester, at the end of the semester, and I want to work for the Astros. I don't care what I get to do. I want to work for the Astros. So I was home on spring break, and he invited me to come in for an interview, and so I was hired basically as an intern that summer. And he told me that it was because I was the most persistent person he had ever met, which was really fun. It was really funny because that was just not my personality, but I was determined that that was the job I wanted, and I was going to do what I had to do to get it.
And you've been a lifelong Astros fan. In fact, that's kind of how our paths crossed, if I remember correctly.
Yes, 2017, you and I met sitting next to each other in West Palm Beach, Florida, at the Astros spring training site. The only spring training game I'd ever attended, I was there in Florida because my son's college team was playing. Had come down from Pennsylvania, and they were playing that week for their spring break. And I lived in Maryland at the time, came down to Florida, meet up with him, watch his games. And the last day before flying back home, I went to the game and was fortunate enough to sit next to you and your wife.
And sat next to a loudmouth guy.
And the rest is history.
And then the rest is history. Outstanding. So you went to school in Arkansas. You got this job with the Astros. I know you have a wonderful family, and I know you've got some kids and grandkids, and I follow you on Facebook, so I see all these wonderful stories. Tell us a little bit about your family structure.
Okay, yes, I've got 4 adult children between the ages of 26 and 35. Can't believe
Wow.
I've got a 35-year-old.
I have a 34-year-old. You have me beat.
Wow. And I'm 1 year older than you, so we had kids at the same time.
There you go.
They're wonderful. I have 3 daughters and a son. My 3 daughters live in Texas, where I am now. My son lives in Virginia with his wife. The 3 girls each have children, so I've got 4 grandchildren. 2 boys, 2 girls. My son doesn't have any children yet, and I'm hoping before they have kids, they'll move back closer to us, or we move closer to them, or something. So somehow we'll all be able to spend time with each other. But
what do your grandkids call you?
Papa Mel.
Papa Mel. Okay.
Yes,
I'm T-Paw.
It started out as Cool Papa Mel.
like Cool Papa Mel. I like that. I like that a lot.
And my my oldest granddaughter shortened it to Papa Mel, and that's what the other ones call me. So
that's fantastic.
And you mentioned I got remarried 6 years ago, and I've got 2 stepsons now, so I've got 6 children total. They are much younger than my children. They are still in high school, and they're twins. So I hadn't anticipated that. I was a single dad for quite a while, and had no plans to ever get remarried. I was relatively fine the way I was. My son was a freshman in college, and I met her, and
you met her shortly after we met, didn't you?
It was probably maybe a month. So
Yeah,
yeah.
I want to say it was real close because I
Yeah.
remember, following you on Facebook and then you saying, "Oh, I met this wonderful lady," and so
Hmm.
that's so awesome. I got to follow that whole deal, so that
Yeah.
was pretty cool. That was pretty cool. That's awesome. So you've got all these great grandchildren, you got all these great kids that are doing amazing things, but you've done a lot of amazing things in your life. Now, you started out as this journalist, being a writer, which was your dream, being a writer for a newspaper, a sports writer. But ultimately, that kind of led to this, what you're doing now. Tell us a little bit about a couple of your books. You can feel free to show them. I'm going to show them here in a minute, and tell us what you've done with your stories, because I think it's just absolutely fascinating.
Well, a little bit of a winding road to get to the books. I will show you those though. My first one I wrote during the pandemic in 2020 is called The Eyes of Texans, and it's my family story on my maternal side. The subtitles From Slavery to the Texas Capitol, and it follows 8 generations of my family, from my great 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 grandparents to my grandchildren. So 8 generations in Texas since the 1840s that I could document. And the second book I wrote, and 2 years later, covers my dad's side of the family, also in Texas during that whole time. It's called The Strength of a Thousand Sons, and the subtitle is More Stories from My Texas Family. So I've been a storyteller of some one sort or another my whole life. Just to lead up to how I got to that point, I was a newspaper reporter, as you mentioned, sports reporter. Um, Married young, had my first daughter when I was 24 years old, and I just didn't feel comfortable that the kind of parent I wanted to be was compatible with the sports writer timetable, time schedule, because generally sports are at night and on the weekends when most people are off work,
And sometimes a lot
and
of travel too, really.
and sometimes a lot of travel, and I wanted to be there for my daughter. So I stayed at the same newspaper, but I was an opening came available in a different department, and I became the entertainment editor for that newspaper. And I wrote a
Interesting.
weekly column. I had the freedom to write what I wanted to, and I generally wrote about sports and politics. And one of our readers was a state senator who started following my columns and liked them and invited me to be a speechwriter for him. So that's how I ended up in
Wow.
politics.
See, folks, I'm getting you a great guest here. We got royalty here. I'm telling you.
So I went to Austin, had no idea I'd ever get involved in politics. I worked for him for a couple of years. He ran for a statewide office and lost, which meant all of us on his staff had to find new jobs. He recommended me without me even knowing to the new incoming lieutenant governor, Rick Perry. And then suddenly I was working for the lieutenant governor.
Who
and
eventually became governor.
and George W. Bush was the governor. When he won the presidency, Rick Perry became governor, and all of a sudden I was working for the governor. So I had no idea, no plans to go work for in government at all. So I went from senator to lieutenant governor to governor in about a span of about 3 to 4 years.
Meteoric rise. That's outstanding. And so what led you from that? Because that's completely different than telling your stories in books. And by the way, I noticed you were too modest, but that second book you held up had a couple of gold labels on that. And I know that means you got some really good accolades. That means you're one heck of a writer, my friend.
Thank you. I actually, that's something I'm pretty proud of. So I don't
You
mind.
should be.
I don't mind patting myself on the back. That's really what I always say. That's my one skill. Writing is my
I
one
don't
skill.
believe that, but I do know you're a heck of a writer, and I'm absolutely just impressed beyond belief about those awards. Tell us a little bit about those two awards you got on that.
Yes, one is a Pencraft Award. Both of these were in 22 when the book came out, and the other one is it's called Literary Titan Book Award. And I actually won another award. I don't remember what it's called. It's a much smaller award. The first book won an award too, and it was a Texas for Texas history. I won a first place for autobiographical Texas history.
See, I should have, when I was a Texas history teacher, I should have used your textbook to help reinforce some of that eras, those different eras that we taught in Texas history. I would love to go back and do that because I certainly would. Um, that would be cool.
It's interesting that you say that because that's what I had in mind when I wrote the book. Obviously, when you're dealing with a sensitive subject like slavery and all the details of that, it can get kind of traumatic and horrific.
It
And
can. It can. Now, I never shied away from it when I was teaching because I think the best way to teach history is how it actually happened. And so I didn't shy away from it. I probably skirted the district a little bit, but I told it as I knew the story was, and I know yours would have just reinforced that. And I applaud you for that, for bringing things to light and putting things out there because the real stories need to be told. They don't need to be whitewashed and put away. They need to be told. So again, kudos for that. My book, it doesn't have any medals. It doesn't have any awards. So I'm jealous, but I'm also proud of you at the same time. That is out freaking standing. That is so cool.
thank you.
Um,
So, can I tell a little
Absolutely,
bit more about this? Well,
please.
when I was writing, my audience that I had in mind were seventh grade Texas history students.
That's what
So
I
I
thought.
wrote it from a perspective where a seventh grader was what 12-year-old would read it and not be traumatized.
12,
But
13.
yeah, but an adult could read it and sort of read between the lines as to what I was
Really
insinuating.
saying, yeah.
And the biggest story in this book and the biggest story in my family's lineage, I believe, was my my great grandparents were the first ones in Texas, and they were enslaved. He was born in Maryland and she was born in Virginia. They were bought and brought here to Texas. They had a family in Leon County, Texas, which is halfway between Houston and Dallas, and their firstborn child was sold away to another plantation in Louisiana. And he was determined he was going to get her back somehow. And he couldn't do it until after emancipation in June of 1865. Somehow he found her, brought her back
God,
to Texas, and she was 19 years old when she came back, and she lived another 80 years in Texas. She
so
died
to the mid 40s then.
She died a few months after World War II. She was born like 13 years before the Civil War, and she died after World War II.
What an amazing life just in and of itself there, and the
Yes.
stories that person could tell.
And so I wrote the book as if my ancestors were telling you the stories themselves rather than me telling you about.
Absolutely brilliant. You know, when we look at history like that and it's in its true state and its true what the misery of having your own child sold and I mean that's just unspeakable. I don't even have to address that because that just goes without saying, but the sheer determination to track her down after emancipation and to reunite the family, that to me is a God thing and a blessing. And I love you for bringing that up and telling the story so that future generations understand the real thing that happened. That's amazing.
Yeah, it took me 30 years of research to find those stories. And when I started writing it, I didn't plan for it to be a book. I just planned for it to be a story to pass down to my children. And after I had written maybe 500, 600, 700 words, I thought this is bigger than just our family. I need to really invest time in this and make it available for other people.
Absolutely. And then from the success of those books, you started your podcast, which is wildly successful. And I was honored to be a guest earlier today on it. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, my podcast is called Stories from Real Life. It was the original title for the first year or so was Real Life and Other Fantasies. And that name came from my idea for what was going to be my third book. It was going to be historical fiction called Real Life and Other Fantasies, and Life in the Suburbs or something like that. I think that's what the subtitle was going to be. And I decided I wanted to tell other people's stories. So rather than going through with my idea to write the book, I decided to start a podcast and interview people to hear their stories. And I changed the name because it was confusing to some people. The word fantasies was confusing to perverts and it was confusing to sci-fi people. So I took the word out, just changed it to stories from real life. I've had 100. The episode with you was episode 177. It publishes twice a week. And last year I was a finalist for Podcaster of the Year, Independent Podcaster of the Year. I do it all myself. I write everything. I write my scripts. I usually write 20 questions after I do the research on my guest. I love doing research. And so I just find that really fascinating. And so I ask people questions and I just let them talk.
I think your format's amazing. I really loved the way you did it. You know, my style's more discussion, like we're just John, and as questions come to my mind, I fire them at you. But I loved how you were very true to your script, and that was very organized and really wonderful. Where can my listeners hear your podcast?
It's available on just about every major podcast platform. It's hosted on Substack. It's hosted on Substack, but it's available on Apple, iHeart, Spotify,
YouTube? Is
Odyssey.
it on YouTube?
It is on YouTube. I generally my videos are the raw interviews. I don't really spend a lot of time editing those, so they're not fancy. They're just pretty raw. Um, so I spend my time on the audio portion. So it's got like under background music
So,
and
yeah.
intro
I've got
and
I've
so
got to work on that. You've got to teach me some tricks to that. But
okay.
I do a lot of visual stuff. I'll put pictures up and I'll put comments underneath, that kind of reinforce what you're saying. And I usually take a day to edit mine as well and put them together and all that good stuff. Okay, so we've done a lot of talking about what an incredible person you are and what incredible things you've accomplished. And I know you've got more, and we'll end the day talking about hopefully your next chapter. But I do know that for my purposes, we talk about something that happened in your life that really kind of molded you into the person that you were. And I know something happened when you were pretty young. You were still a new teenager. I think you were 13. Is that correct?
I was when I was 13 years old, my dad passed away fairly suddenly of a stroke. And that's I consider that a demarcation line in my life. There's everything that happened before that stage and everything that happened after that stage. And my dad and I were very close, very, very close. I mentioned it was me and my parents. You were an only child, so you can sort of understand this dynamic. But I was just very close to my dad. We were buddies, and we'd go fishing almost every weekend. We went to dozens of Astros games, and we just ride. I just enjoyed spending time with him. And while we were doing those things, he would be telling me stories, life stories, things that weren't even relevant to me at the time. But after he passed away, they became relevant, and it started to make me think maybe he knew he was going to have a short life, and this was his way of parenting me through my teenage years.
So that's very interesting, and that leads me to ask you, how did that teenage Melvin Edwards deal with that? How did you cope with that tragic loss? Because I got to tell you, I lost my mom in my, I guess I was right at 40 something when I lost my mom. So it wasn't when I was a kid. I had to deal with it when I was an adult. As a child, though, how did you deal with it?
Well, I wouldn't recommend anybody else doing it the way I did it. I essentially pretended it didn't happen. I I remember he died on a Monday, and I went to school on Tuesday. I just tried to carry on because I felt strongly that's what he would want me to do, but I didn't really deal
Want you
with
to
it.
wallow in pity or
Yeah,
or anything like that?
but I didn't deal with it at all, um, and I just carried on. I felt like I lost my childhood. That's for sure. I became the man of the house, and I felt like it was my responsibility at that point to take care of my mother, not financially, but like physically
But
take
but
care
but
of.
physically and doing things around the house and what have you. Yeah, I can see that. And that's a lot of pressure on a young man. I mean, that's a lot of pressure. Did that religious background at all help you a little bit through that, you think, that faith? Or was that something that maybe you fell back on later in life and kind of realized maybe it was undertone?
No, it definitely helped me get through it. It made me think like I was in church every Sunday and several other days of the week usually. But once when he passed away, it made me think, is this faith my own or am I living under my parents' faith? So it made me realize I needed my own faith. And so I was baptized at 13 years
So
old.
I wanna make sure I understand that. Did you mean to say that you were, like, questioning it, or you just felt you had to be independent from what you had before?
I just felt it had to be my own.
Okay,
Like
okay.
it like I was it felt like to me that my parents were Christians and automatically I was a Christian without ever consciously thinking about that. And I wanted it to be more
You
active.
wanted to be yours. You wanted it
Right.
to be something that you felt you bought into, that you felt part of. Not that you didn't believe, but that you wanted your own thing. I'm trying to put words in your
Yeah.
mouth, but that's
No,
what I'm
that's
hearing.
absolutely the truth. It was obviously a struggle as most people go through because my dad had the stroke like late in the week and then he passed away a couple days later. And I was home by myself during that time. Like my mom was at the hospital with him. And I remember praying the whole weekend for I didn't know how dire it was. I was praying the whole weekend. And then Monday he passed away and I felt like God just ignored me.
You,
But
you you
I
felt like your prayers weren't answered, and you're almost abandoned to a degree. You were left to be the man of the house and to do these things, and so I can certainly understand that. And one of the things that's a common thread with my guests is that time period, and for some it's longer than others, of almost self-pity, where you're like, why me, why did this happen? I know I certainly went through it when my eye happened. I know that other guests have happened, whatever tragic events happened, that they kind of were like questioning God, why did this happen, why, how long did it take you to get out of that cycle?
I'm not really sure. I know
Or did you?
that
Maybe you're still not out.
I'm still going. I literally am still going through it. Um, I remember the next school. It was towards the end of the school year when he died, and the next school year, I was in the ninth grade. I really struggled that year. Like I hadn't ever struggled with school before, but I really struggled that year because I had a hard time focusing. And and one of the reasons why I hate labels so much, even good labels, because it puts additional pressure on a person. And I was always labeled when I was a kid, like he's the smart one in the family. And then when I was in ninth grade, within the year after my dad died, I struggled in school and got bad grades for the first time, and I sort of lost my identity. I was thinking maybe I'm not the smart one anymore.
Well, you're singing to me right here because I speak often on my podcast about how opposed I am to labels. I can't stand it. You go back and you listen to several other episodes, and I talk about it all the time. I always told all my students, I don't like labels. I don't want to hear that this person struggles with this. I want to know individually what you are, and I want you to be the best that you can be. That may be better or worse, but you're not competing against other people. You're competing against yourself. Be the best that you can be, and I share that sentiment with you. So I love that. As amazing as it can seem, our 30 minutes is already up. It goes by so quick. But before we go and before I exit, I definitely want to hear what's next for Melvin Edwards. What's next? Are you working on a new book? You're going to expand your podcast? You're going to do a movie? You're going to, what are you going to do, Superman?
Yes, all the above. Actually, I'm developing a book. I've never written fiction before, so my idea is to write a novel. It's really grandiose. It'll be by far the biggest thing I've ever written. And I've also applied to be a fellow with the Texas Writers League, so I can get a little bit of help in this process. I'm developing characters now before I start writing the idea for the book, but it's a pretty big idea. I don't want to talk about the details too much yet.
But I just wanted to kind of know the general thought of where are you taking this to next, because your whole career it just seems like you reach this dream and now you set a new one, and then you set a new one, and I've patterned my life a little bit about that way too. I'll set a new goal and do something different, but you're just on this amazing trajectory. That is just so wonderful to watch from afar. I can't wait. I personally can't wait to see that. But I always try to be cognizant of my guests' time. So I do want to kind of end it here. I'm going to wrap it up. And if you'll hang on with me a little bit, I'm going to kind of go through this at the end. And if you like hearing uplifting stories of overcoming challenges in life, click that like and subscribe button. I think I've finally learned it's down this way. Perhaps you have a story of your own to share: an accident, sudden loss, PTSD, alcohol, drug abuse, a natural disaster, illnesses, and you would like to share that journey of overcoming. Please contact me at the email shown below for consideration for a future podcast interview. I rely on viewers like you to share their stories, and that is so important because I get great people like Mr. Edwards here. Thanks again to TradingCardsMarketplace.com for their continued sponsorship to bring all these great stories to us. TradingCardsMarketplace.com. Discover, connect, and collect. Awaken the collector in you. I want to thank everyone out there, especially my family, our military, veterans, and first responders who put their lives on the line every day. And we can't afford to forget our teachers and medical professionals who all make the world better, one person at a time. But most of all, thank God for all the blessings in our world. We just need to make sure that we concentrate on those blessings every single day. Until next time, my friends, carpe diem and seize the day.